Hello and welcome to the Colossians 2:7 Podcast in English. Du hörst gerade eine monatliche Folge für unsere Freunde in den Staaten. While our regular listeners are primarily German, we are delighted to have a growing number of listeners from the States as well. Odds are you know us personally, and I want to thank you for tuning in. In this special episode, we invite you, dear friend, to join Willi and me as we engage in thoughtful conversation about life and ministry within the German context. So that means we are officially now starting with the men teaching on Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, it has to be.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Because that's something we've been practicing for over a year or so.
Yes. And they need to do that.
Mm-hmm. But I was very impressed with him when we had all those Ukrainian refugees, or those Roma, because he was teaching Sunday school in Russian.
There you go. Yeah, he has to be forced to do that.
I should probably get the gum out of my mouth, otherwise I'm going to be going...
Oh yeah, you should not do. See, the question is self-control and gum, or no self-control and no gum? I have self-control.
I'm doing self-control, that's why I'm throwing away the gum.
Oh, good one.
It's like, are you practicing self-control if you are surrounded by temptation? Or are you practicing self-control by not having temptation there at all?
I see what you're doing there.
That's why I don't buy junk food or candy or anything. I go to your place to eat it.
I was going to say, wait a minute. You are.
Well, we are already recording, and I think it'd be interesting to... You figured?
Well, yeah. It's not my first time. It's not my first rodeo, my friend.
I really wanted to say that with like a strong German accent. Do you want to try it?
Sure. Welcome, my friends, to the German-English Colossians 2:7 podcast. This
podcast has been around for a little over a year now.
Wow, way more than a year.
Well, we started during the holiday season last year.
2 years ago.
Correct. 2
Which
years
holiday
ago.
season, my friend?
The Christmas season.
Oh, there you go. You little heathen.
In the Christmas season in 2022.
Yes.
And because a girl from our church said, you know what? The younger generation, so Generation Z, that was her generation, they don't watch as much YouTube. Instead, they listen to podcasts.
There you go. So does my wife.
But she's the same age as I am.
Yes.
And we are millennials.
Yes,
you included.
No. I claim the in-between group.
The in-between?
Yes.
I think I saw that somewhere where someone claimed to be like an in-betweener.
Yes. There are actually quite a lot of us.
Probably those on the older end of millennials that don't want to be associated with us young folk.
Exactly.
Although the young folk now is early to mid-30s.
Yeah, well, we still have to push you around in a wheelchair.
We started this podcast because I thought it'd be a good idea if, for one, we had a reason to get together on a regular basis.
Yes, you and I.
Yes.
Sweet.
You and me. And then we can talk about what either stuff that we are reading or something that we have learned. We tend to have more topical podcast episodes.
Correct. Which I think the Bible gives room for. When you read Paul, I think he gives room for topical podcast episodes. And that, it doesn't have to be exegetical.
I suppose that's true, yes. And so the primary audience that I thought back then would be anyone who wants to listen, which is primarily our church, our congregation, fellowshipping churches, a little bit here and there as well.
Including Gerhard.
But then I realized that we have a growing demographic in the States that's listening.
Yes.
So about 80% of our listeners are in Germany, and 10% are in the States, and most of that is in Iowa and Minnesota.
Correct. And then there are a few odds and ends all over the world.
Yes. We have some in Australia, and you know them personally.
Rachel.
Then we have some like in Sweden, and then we have some in some weird countries I've never heard of before. And I'm guessing they're using, what's that called? A VPN?
Yes.
And so probably that's where those
possible
odd countries are coming from.
By the way, the country is called France. Oh.
And then maybe you've encountered this too, where we have guests that come, or you meet someone in the States and they ask, well, how's Germany?
Mm-hmm.
You cannot summarize the ministry in Germany in one sentence.
Correct.
Or in one tiny conversation.
Yes.
And I do think for the most part, those questions are genuine. Like, what are you guys doing over there? How are things? And it's not something you can simply answer very shortly.
Correct.
So I thought, since we have a growing number of listeners from the States, and odds are they know us personally.
Yes.
We can talk about ministry here in Germany once a month in English for our friends in the States.
Yeah. It's kind of an update on the ministry, update on our lives.
Mm-hmm. If they're listening, they probably know us personally because they probably served here in Germany.
Yes.
And so they already have an interest for ministry in Germany and a passion for ministry in Germany. And perhaps you could share these English episodes with your friends.
Correct.
Because you never know how a podcast episode or how an encounter can change someone to fall in love with a country and then feel a calling to go into ministry.
Correct. And I mean, we had people from faith at our church, and you and I lived in America, and we went to faith, and people know us personally, but also then the chorale came over, or the choir, chamber, whatever Chris calls that group. Then you have possibly another team coming over. Then you have maybe a youth group coming over. All those different possibilities where people get to know us. And we talked about internships. And I talked to Christoph about internships because we want to offer that to Americans to come and get an idea of the ministry here. I truly believe in a big emphasis on learning by relationship in so many ways. And this podcast could be a way of getting to know us, building a relationship, and also through that, seeing a side of the ministry, seeing a side of Germany that is not the standard what you might get in a presentation.
One of our most listened to episodes is actually when the choir was here. And I had the boys here in our baby room at church.
There you go.
And I simply asked them, well, what was their impression of Germany? And I think I'd like to start off with that because I do find it very interesting. One of our fellowshipping churches sends their teens and young adults to the States to faith, to see young Christian men and to show them.
See them rejoice.
See them rejoice.
Young Christian men rejoice. Another song, by the way. It's
another
musical
song that I don't know very well.
Young Christian men rejoice. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I did not grow up in the States, and so a lot of American culture I only know from afar. And even when I lived there during my time at Faith, you're so overwhelmed with school and ministry and work. Even though I was living within that culture, a lot of it was still very, very foreign to me.
I can understand what you mean. For some, it might be a surprise. I did not grow up in America either.
What?
Not even in Canada.
People mistake you as Canadian.
They have people, yes.
They think your wife Heidi is a German.
Correct.
That makes sense.
Yes.
And also, it says a lot about her language skills.
Yes.
Because she learned German very fast.
Yes.
And speaks it quite fluently.
Yes.
And only if you speak with her for a long time, you might hear something here or there which might expose her as American.
Well, but then even then, people don't right away say American. They would say somewhere from, but not. They wouldn't pinpoint it to America because she doesn't roll the R or chew the R as much as Americans would do.
But you guys speak English in public.
Yes.
As a family, and so they will hear the English coming from you.
Correct.
But then you're at the store, you're at the checkout line, and then you speak in perfect Bavarian, and they're kind of thrown off guard.
Correct. Yes.
And so I think because you are overall a very friendly person.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
They probably think you're Canadian, not American.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Jim, if he hears that, he can tell me. if it's a good or bad thing if somebody would say, well, you're Canadian. And what it would be, I don't know. I don't know what it would be.
Where was I getting with that?
Well, we kind of got off topic, but you were talking about the Christian men that went to faith.
Oh, yes. So one of our fellowshipping churches sends young people to the States to see the Christian culture there.
Yeah.
But then you have people from that same institution, from faith, coming here, and they are overwhelmed and fascinated by the quote-unquote Christian culture here.
Yes.
And I find that very interesting, because I would think that many people from our congregations will look towards the States as maybe not like the pinnacle of Christianity, but definitely something to strive to be.
Correct.
But then likewise, people come to Germany and they are very encouraged by how we live as a church, yes, amongst each other and with other churches.
Correct. And the funny thing is, if you go back to our churches, they were started by missionaries from America.
Yes.
So when they came over, they brought a certain American culture with them.
Yes.
Part of that was American culture, some of that was Christian culture, and so that was implemented in the churches here. Now, our churches are mainly not run by Americans anymore.
Correct.
If you want to say it that way. So the missionaries have left the field, the one that started the churches, but there are still a few Americans here where they are the pastor of the church. And so they are Germanized churches, but they kept certain parts of that. And now in America, the churches, of course, have grown as well.
Yes.
So you leave the country, you go to a new country, you take that part with you, you implement it here, but there they don't stop in America.
Yeah.
So they also develop and they evolve, and then the churches in Germany evolve. And what we had, because there are fewer churches, the bond that we had, we really holding on to that.
Would you say that because the American influence that our churches have are from missionaries that came back in the day, that our churches have that American Christian flavor from like the 80s and 90s? Would that be an accurate assumpment?
I think not so much anymore.
Okay.
It used to be, but now it's more Germanized.
Yeah, we have 11 fellowshipping churches. I think it's 11.
Directly fellowship, and then we have a few add-ons.
Yeah, and we're all along the Autobahn, the interstate. I guess most people know what the Autobahn is, right?
They should.
It's
if
called
not, come over.
It's called the A9 Autobahn.
Yeah,
and it goes from north to south, and most of our churches are within 15-20 minutes from that Autobahn.
Correct.
So we're all pretty closely knit in that sense. But when we have our church, our pastors' meetings, I'm very encouraged because most of the pastors are German. So there's very few American pastors left.
Yes.
Additionally, it's not just that you have these German national pastors, but they might bring a deacon with or someone they're discipling with too.
Yeah.
And so it's not like the missionaries found one guy to become a pastor and then the missionaries left. No, there's an evidence of disciples making disciples.
Correct. Yeah, it's multiplying, and some things are slower than others, but yes, it is a great time to get together to see the different churches, how they have grown. We've seen, since I've attended the pastors' meeting, I was there also before I was a pastor. So I became a pastor in 2015, and I was there maybe even, I don't know if I was there before, I don't think before America, but definitely since 2010 I've attended occasionally.
When did you go to the States?
2005, and I came back in December 2009. So after that, at one point, Christoph took me to the pastors' meeting as a disciple, and as a just sit in, get an idea of that. And then in the last 10 years, there have been multiple church plants. And with the church plants, now there's talk about more church plants, even from the church plants.
Yes.
And so to see that developing is just really, really great.
Like, I believe that the church in Nuremberg was a church plant from Erlangen.
Correct.
And the church in Neumarkt, where Mark Boyd is, that's a church plant from Nuremberg.
Correct.
More or less.
Yes.
And so is Eckenthal. Correct? Yeah.
It's, more or less, I think is the right way to describe that. But yes, there are, at least Mark and Daniel were in Nuremberg serving there. And then they went.
And then we are a church plant from the church in Ingolstadt.
Correct.
Where Charlie Ellis was at.
Yes.
And now Christoph is at.
Correct.
And most people in our circles in the States recognize him because he's a 6'6" German. So when he shows up at Faith or in any churches in the area, if you know him, you know him.
Yes, correct. Yes, and he has been the first national pastor in our circles.
Really?
Yes. And he was the one that actually got saved through the ministry. So you have him. He became the first pastor of... That is not true.
Who was the first pastor?
Olli
Meyer.
But Christoph was the first pastor of a church alone without an American.
Okay.
Because Charlie left in 2005. And Jeff was still there when they then started the church plant when he went to Nuremberg. So then, but around that time. And then there was Joachim, but he was there with Todd daily in Bad Heilbrunn. And then there's Frank, but he was with Lomax.
Yes.
So you had those connections. But Charlie was, in that sense, the first one to leave because the church was actually independent. So maybe he wasn't the first German pastor, but Ingolstadt was the first independent church. We had an Independence Day.
Yeah.
On July 4th.
Really?
Yes. Christoph made a big emphasis on Independence Day.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. He even said at one Spaßtag, Ami, go home.
What?
Yes.
Spaßtag is a fun day.
Correct.
That's when all of our fellowshipping churches come together on May 1st. It's on May 1st, right? And then have a cookout, devotional, and just time spending together.
Correct.
The choir did travel around from church to church.
Yes.
But they really loved staying at our church. And they said there was a warmth here that...
We did crank up the heat.
It was May, and it was quite hot, yes.
Yeah.
But they came here, and they really liked staying here. And the words that they used to describe our church was there's an authenticity here. And I try to emphasize that, yes, most of our people at our church have not grown up in a Christian environment. Most of them are Catholic, former Catholics, and some of them were pretty much unchurched before they got saved. But what I wanted to emphasize to the chorale when they were here is that because people did not grow up in a Christian bubble per se, when they're at our church, they chose to do so. They made the very conscious decision to leave a certain life behind. Either it was a life of maybe not godlessness per se, but a life where God played no role whatsoever.
Yeah.
Or a life that was very Catholic. And when they left that life behind, they also had a great loss too. They lost a lot of stuff. And so when we gather together, it's not because it's simply convenient. In our church, they strive for fellowship and community.
They long for it. Yes. And you can see that. For the longest time, it's not always like that, but for the longest time we had as many people on a Wednesday Bible study that we had for Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Now, that is because all the members come. Now our church is growing, and partially we have people that live further away, and they cannot come Wednesdays because of work, because of all that, and we have quite a few guests coming, but we still have on a regular basis a good crowd on Wednesdays, and we don't have a Sunday school, we don't have Sunday evening service, but we have that time, and we have it on Wednesday because it gives you another boost through the week, and so they do long for that, and they like it, and it's for them a home, and we try to emphasize family.
We do emphasize family, and especially for the kids, it's actually true. They look forward to coming to church and being with their friends, and they cry when they have to go back home.
Literally, yes. They also cry though when they have to go to kids class.
Yes.
On Sundays.
Which so Sunday school in the morning, yes, for the kids. They do cry beforehand, but they do like their time there.
Correct. They
just put up a fuss when they leave the auditorium and go to the classrooms.
They love to run up front.
Yes.
For the song. Yes. I just talked to my sisters over Christmas, and they know that I preach about 45 minutes. And one of my sisters said, that's way too long. 20 minutes tops.
20 minutes.
Because then people start to repeat themselves and go on and on and on. I said, honestly, I mean, I don't listen to my sermons. I try not to repeat myself, but that's why I write everything out. So that I actually have a complete train of thought and going through it. And I said, but our church is used to it. And if we have less sermon than songs or the first part of the service, I think it's just missing something. And
that's why we keep adding more and more songs. The sermons get longer and longer.
Well, we have about 15 songs. But at the same time, it's the main feeding of the flock on a Sunday morning. And I would say our church has a desire for God's word.
And a desire to be obedient to God's word.
Yes.
We have a lady at church, her name is Maria, or Mary, and she grew up as a devout Catholic. And even after she was saved, she was still working for the Catholic Church as a secretary. So she was our person on the inside.
Yes.
But because she had some handicap, it was difficult for her to find a different job.
Yes.
So she couldn't become a member at our church because we only allow one church membership. So she could only become a member once she found a new job.
Yeah.
And perhaps people at home are wondering, why can't she just leave the church and still have her job? It's because she worked for the Catholic Church, and she had to stay a member of the church to keep her job.
Yes, it actually said in the contract, if you leave the church, you will lose your job.
Yes.
And so those are different things. And, it is funny because in Bible college you learn certain things. And I really value what I've learned at Faith. But certain things they can't teach you. And one thing is what you experience outside of America. Because it is so different. There are things in America you cannot experience that you experience in Germany. And so it is interesting. So you get, you were at Faith 4 years college, 3 years seminary.
5 years college.
5 years college.
I squeezed 4 years into 5.
Oh, there you go. That's that's pretty good. Pretty good. So 8 years of theological training, and a lot of things that you've learned. I was there 4 years or 4.5 years, and but there are certain things that you learn on the job. You have to be on the field, and even then you don't go through. Okay, now you're going to learn this. It's as you go, and so you come across certain things where it's of course we believe that. Why? Well, that's what we believe, and then there are questions, and you go through the Bible, and the Bible doesn't talk about it, well, the Bible doesn't talk about the Catholic Church eliminating your job. So you have to actually go into what is the principle behind it?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we do that? Why? Because we as a church even talked about it.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting.
We talked about the role of baptism in the church, which you wouldn't think that's a controversial topic, and it really isn't. But then you have Maria, who is still a member, or was still a member at the Catholic Church because of her job. She was not even going to the services anymore,
Yes.
to Mass anymore.
Correct.
But she was still a member of the Catholic Church because of her job, and then she wanted to be obedient and faithful and get baptized. But we believe that baptism follows, or what's the wording in English? Precedes. There you go.
Yes.
That's the problem when you have two people speaking where English is not necessarily the mother tongue.
Yes, correct.
You kind of forget words. Where baptism precedes church membership.
Yes.
So then you want to get baptized. Wonderful. Are you going to be a member too?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem that we're faced.
Yeah.
And so eventually, for her, it wasn't simply tolerating the Catholic Church, but she was saying, I feel sick to my stomach working for the Catholic Church because of the lies it spreads.
Yeah.
And she had a really hard time even going to work.
Correct.
And so that's why, in faith, she was looking for another job. Mm-hmm. And she found one.
Yeah.
And then within a month of her finding a new job, she got baptized, became a member.
Correct. Yeah. And now she's a pastor. Just kidding. Just checking if you're still awake.
But not only did she got the new job, but she also lost all those acquaintances and friends as well. Mm. To her former colleagues, she was a lunatic.
Yeah.
She was going crazy and joining a cult.
Funny thing is, there are a couple people that said, I totally agree with you, but I wouldn't leave. One of her bosses said, I'm glad that you found that. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't leave, but he agreed with her.
So he was glad that she left the church to join a congregation.
Yes.
And he said, "Good for you."
Yes. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yes.
It's in our city. It's a very Catholic town. Mm. There are 17 Catholic churches.
Even the tap water's holy. That's how Catholic we are.
There are 17 Catholic churches in a town of 14,000. Mm. There's a mosque, there's a Lutheran church, and us.
Yes.
So it's a very, very Catholic environment. Our town is pretty much owned by the company I work for, which is a construction company called Martin Maya. Yeah. And the other half is pretty much...
If you need anything, let us know.
And the other half is pretty much owned by the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And the Catholic Church, and this might put us in trouble, and a good cliffhanger to end the episode, but they actually don't mind us. I would say they actually are fond of us in a way. Would you say?
Yes, they do like us. Mm-hmm. They appreciate that we emphasize the Word of God.
Yes. Yes, and even when your daughter got baptized, her nun teacher, illegally, in the shadows, came to the baptism.
Correct.
And she said, I'm glad you baptized like the early church did in the New Testament.
Correct.
And you will hear that quite often, that the church will like us, like what we teach, because... they even admit it. It's closer to the teaching of Christ and the teaching of the early church.
Correct.
But then you ask, well, why don't you adjust to that then?
Yes.
That's where you have the tradition.
Correct.
And that's something we're faced with. Whenever we're faced with people that are Catholic, have a Catholic background, because it's a very well-designed brainwashing institution.
Oh yeah, it's very true, very true, and it is so well indoctrinated, all the things, and to question that, it's so well done. If you question it, well then you question the only source of truth.
Yeah.
which is the church, because that is what was given, and which is not true. It's not the Catholic Church. We have the Bible. That is the truth, and so.
And that's where I took the class Cults at Faith, and Catholicism was part of it. And it's one thing to learn in a book and in class that in the Catholic system there are different pillars of truth. You have God's word, you have tradition, you have the Pope, and then you have the Magistrat.
Well, it's actually 2 or 3, but Pope and Magistrat would be together.
Okay.
So it's scripture, tradition, and then the Pope with the...
Yeah. And so it's one thing to read that in a book, another thing to see it lived out.
Yes.
And how it influences people's lives.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of people that are at our church.
Yeah. So, if we have another episode...
Yes.
Because it depends on if people listen and want another episode.
You know what my dad said?
No.
He said, when you talk about ministry in Germany and give updates or write prayer letters, be careful what you say and don't share more than you need to. So we'll see if we get in trouble.
Yes, I have gotten a lot in trouble for sharing too much.
Yeah?
Yes. Privately or on the air. Actually, we're not on the air. We're on the internet.
Yes. A podcast is the modern version of radio.
Oh, that's it. So online is on air.
Sure.
There you go. So on the line. All the things I've said on the line, not on the air.
On the waves.
On the waves. While I was surfing the internet. Well, that is an interesting episode, definitely. So you get a little bit of what we do, who we are, and where we are. And we will talk about different things and issues, and you'll hear step by step what our church is doing.
The goal is to have one episode a month, and I already wrote down 18 different topics, so we already planned a year and a half.
Is it exegetical or is it topical?
It's topical.
Okay.
But I'll sign off with the sign off that I give for our podcast in German.
Oh, watch out.
Which is, stay frosty, my friends.
Well, I'm going to sign off. I don't know if I have a typical sign off, but have a great week. And we'll see you next month.
Okay.